his proficiency in blue mirrors. Zan metagaming like he's done all year. It's no surprise to see them making deep runs here at the Players' Championship.
Yeah, like on Zan's side, the deck, not a huge meta choice. He did play the best deck here, but his sideboard is fairly meta.
Exactly.
We see two of the different teams showing up with Simic. Rampazam, of course, on the Lotus Box build. So here we will go for the first game of this. I guess we can call it day 2 final. I'm not sure. I was going to say semifinal, quarterfinal. Quarterfinal sense that the winner is now 3 matches away from being the champion.
Right.
And Zan on the play here, turn 2 Growth Spiral, and this is the kind of start he wants to see.
Right, and him choosing to do it on his turn is a sign that he's respecting the possibility of Oliver having some sort of counter magic.
Right, those main deck quenches, main deck mystical disputes can work here. 4th land for Syed. Oliver with a Growth Spiral of his own, but wants to hold up counter magic here. We see Zan starting to leverage some of this mana as he makes Leafkin Druid, leaving up 2 more lands. Resolves, and he's going to go ahead and go for a second Druid. And Oliver can ramp here, but he is behind.
Right, this is a spot where Zan wants to make sure that he can make Quench kind of an embarrassing card. Theoretically, Tomajko could have quenched this second Leafkin Druid, but that's just not what's important anymore. Now Tomajko needs to get to the spot where he's getting to his hard counter magic.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like trading a quench for a Leafkin Druid against a big mana deck is a fine play, but it's more the opportunity of it. It means he wouldn't get to Growth Spiral, and that's just not acceptable.
Exactly, and you know, the difference between Syed having access to 7 mana and 6 mana next turn is not very pronounced, and we've reached a spot where Tomajko needs to choose, is he going after Syed's development or the payoff cards? And if you counter the second Leafkin Druid, how much are you really stymieing his development?
Zan's side taps 6 mana, and you know when he's tapping into all this open mana, this is the play you expect to see. It's Hydroid Krasis for 4, so the trigger will resolve. The 4/4 can counter, but Zan still gets 2 life, 2 cards, regardless.
And this is a great spot for Syed, because even if Tomajko counters it, he's going to get that card draw and come out a little bit ahead in this exchange.
And so right now the card draw has resolved, and Oliver is debating if he wants to stop the 4/4. He's going to cast Opt, holding the creature on the stack. And it's hard, right, on Oliver's side. I mean, yes, you can counter this to keep the board clear, but Oliver's deck is a deck that wants to be ahead on the board, and it's hard to see him getting to that spot here.
Right, I completely agree.
Growth Spiral, another land. This does mean Quench is available, and that will be the play. So overall, a pretty good sequence that Oliver can both ramp and counter.
Right, and now if he can have something like a Nissa and another land coming down from here, it's possible that he's just able to run away with this.
Yeah, post-combat, Zan plays a Temple, but he is tapped out. Oliver gets the play of his choice. Nissa would be the best card here. What can he do to follow up? And that is the one. It is Nissa who shakes the world. This is the strongest counterplay Oliver can do. So he casts it. 2 green floating, untaps the land, can have 2 more green, and it's just going to be Nightpack Ambusher. The time for tempo plays appears to be over for Oliver.
Right, and you know, in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like Tomajko's just also trying to do some big mana plays, right? So on his turn 6, he effectively made 9 mana worth of permanence.
Yeah, and at this point, they're both playing the ramp game plan. The danger on Oliver's side is if Zan untaps and makes his own Nissa, Zan's deck is better set up to use big mana.
Correct, and most of what Tomajko is kind of saying here is, I need to develop threats onto the battlefield, and this is the window. It does not get better for him as the game progresses.
So we go to Syed. What is his counter? 8 mana, opponent tapped out. And maybe he doesn't have the Nissa. It's starting to feel that way.
Yeah, he certainly has options here, but still trying to figure out what exactly that means.
7 mana. Both Agent of Treachery and Endray's Forerunners are in Zan's deck. So, but at 7, it could be an Agent. 1 in the main, that would be a huge...
That'd be a big one.
Dare I say, it could be a huge steal if he casts it. And it is not. It is actually just one of the 2 copies of Finale of Devastation. Nisfinding Cavalier of Thorns. A fine play, but I think one Oliver's happy to see.
Right, and the nice thing about this, if you're on Syed's side of the battlefield, is that this does gum things up for a little bit. It is difficult for Tomajko to actually pressure Syed through this, and if you end up in a top deck war, that's going to favor Syed so long as he is able to catch up with what Tomajko is doing on the battlefield.
Enter the battlefield trigger from the Cavalier. Not too much you can mill over. There are 2 copies of Quasi-Duplicate that Zan's deck team is playing this weekend, so when you mill over it with Cavalier, it is like you drew a card. Finds a land. Leafkin Druid going to make another Leafkin. So now all the mana is online for Zan. 4 creatures in play. But he's on the wrong side of the Nissa fight, and that's going to matter.
Yeah, but on the other side of things, if Syed just has another Finale of Devastation in his hand, he could just be threatening lethal next turn.
Right, and you're looking at just the X equals 10 mode on Finale of Devastation?
Correct. You also get an Indra's Forerunners with that, which is just so much damage.
Yeah, the creatures gain haste with Finale. The Forerunners will give them trample. It certainly is a way to end any sort of mess of a board.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't particularly matter how many blockers Oliver has. So on Oliver's side, we do see another Nissa activation, making this time an island into a 3/3. And Oliver passes. Nightpack Ambusher, making a wolf. 4 mana in play for Oliver. That's some counter magic. Could be Frilled Mystic. Zan's draw, basic forest. And you see now, Zan, the untap here with 14 mana.
A couple. No big deal. Call it a ramp deck for a reason, you know.
The Finale Devastation then is lethal. If it resolves.
That's the trick against a deck like Oliver's.
Oliver's deck with plenty of cards in the
Was
main.
that nothing from Syed?
I think, yeah, he has 1 card in hand, and that looked like a pass from Zan. Now Oliver, sensing he's ahead here, should just be able to clean it with a Frilled Mystic. The only real card Zan has going on right now is this 1 Blast Zone that can do some work here, but not enough.
Yeah, the thing that you could see it doing here is either going after Nissa or Nightpack Ambusher, and the problem is that both of these cards are making a 3/3 every single turn.
Right. I mean, if it blows up the Nissa, Zan would also lose his Cavalier, which might be a good thing. Finale of Devastation is in the graveyard.
Right, and then you can get back another Cavalier, or go for the kill.
Well, that's interesting. If he loses Cavalier, Zan's at 3 creatures. I don't know if he has the mana for a game-ending Finale.
Well, you can float the mana before the Cavalier goes away.
Pass from Tomajko. End steps Zan. What is he going to do with the Blast Zone? This looks like he's going to crank it up to 5. That is the place. This will clear away Cavalier and Nissa. Oliver with plenty of mana in play. You have to be worried about on Zan's side.
There's also a point where with 15 toughness, or
Think he can
19
survive?
toughness, Tomajko could possibly survive. You'd have to chump a
that
lot
is
away,
pretty wild.
but this is a lot of toughness on the battlefield.
So, we go to Zan. This is during his own upkeep. He's going to pop Blast Zone, can put a card on top with the Cavalier of Thorns. Gets to choose his draw. There is Nissa Who Shakes the World in the graveyard. There's also Finale of Devastation.
There's also a reasonable case to be made for something like Hydroid Crisis if he just wants a raw quantity of cards.
I guess, yeah, if he's really just worried about a counterspell. I actually like that a lot. And Zan's going to make the safe play here.
Right, and against Tomajko, when you know that this Simic Flash deck has all these counter spells, and Tomajko hasn't played anything in, 3 draws?
Right.
Lot of respect on Syed's side here.
This is upkeep. He draws the Krasis. Now let's look over at those lands. It is 10 mana in play. Well, 8 mana, actually. The Druids are no longer as big as they could be. Looks like Krasis for 6. That is the 8 mana play, so it's 3 cards for Zan. And a healthy blocker here, but he still has some problems to solve. Nightpack Ambusher is going to continue to make wolves, and Oliver still has cards in hand.
Right, this is the kind of gambit where if these 3 cards are just air, which can happen with a ramp deck, Syed could get really punished for this.
Looks like Zan's 3 cards found a land, I believe a growth spiral. Neither of those will help. But maybe that third one in there is something he can use.
A second Nightpack Ambusher from Tomajko.
And that is going to become a problem. You mentioned having enough toughness that this doesn't matter. Oliver is getting close to that point.
Right, and Tomajko's still at 20, and each of these ambushers, since they are both lords for wolves...
Now they're 4/4s.
Right, and they're both making wolves each turn. So this is a pair of 4/4s coming down on each of Tomajko's end steps. Well, he doesn't cast a spell, but the thing about a flash deck, you get where...
I think I see it, yeah.
You see.
It shouldn't take too many turn cycles for Oliver to have this game done. And you see the attack here. It's going to be the entire team. Oliver actually willing to feed an ambusher into the Hydroid Krasis.
Well, let's look at how much damage
is this lethal?
Worth.
Check it out.
At the very least...
So the 2 biggest are the
17?
ambushers, right? The ambushers are 5s.
Right.
So we have 9. Yeah, 17 at the least.
Wow.
Fair enough.
This is a big swing.
Looks like Zan's just going to block 1, so he takes 22 points of damage. And we'll be dropping to 3. 2-turn clock indeed.
So that's a sizable chunk, but this also removes a bunch of Tomajko's blocking capability. If he doesn't have a counterspell, he could just die to a finale from Syed.
Yeah, behind a counterspell, I feel pretty good about Oliver's board here.
Mm-hmm.
He's pushing enough damage that a Hydroid Krasis or something like that isn't going to keep Zan alive. And Zan's looking like he's contemplating jump blocking with a Leafkin Druid.
He may just think that's the only way for him to get to play this game.
And decides not to. I like this. This is so much. He's preserving a lot of mana here.
Mm-hmm.
Goes to 3.
Now, Leafkin Druid is effectively worth 4 mana. 2 on its own, and then 1 each on the other 2 Leafkin Druids.
But just, you have, with the way Oliver appears to be pacing, it just feels like he has the counterspell.
Yeah, but are you beating it either way?
No. I mean, it doesn't change Zan's plays, but I'm not optimistic about it.
Mm-hmm.
Tons of mana on Zan's side. He did get 3 cards last turn off that Hydroid Krasis. Go back Zan. Growth Spiral. Not something that inspires confidence here. Castle Vantress. Three more from Zan. Risen Reef to play. That puts a card maybe into hand. He still has 10 mana available here. That puts Castle Garenbrig into play. I think Zan wondering if he can even stay alive.
Yeah, at this point he's just trying to create material on the battlefield, making blockers.
And yeah, we see now Oliver at the ready with Frilled Mystic. And that is going to be game one. So Oliver Tomajko picking up the win here.
And that's just kind of the strength of this Flash deck. We saw that Syed really only cast, 3 spells that impacted the game? It felt like 4 maybe, and Tomajko countered 2 of them.
Yeah, well, what I noticed there is that Zan actually had a really good start. 6 mana to Oliver's 3. It's the kind of thing where you would want a ramp tech to be favored. But the fact that Oliver's deck also gets to play for Nissa, who shakes the world, really confuses how this matchup you'd expect to play out. The mana advantage wasn't big enough because when Zan went for his first payoff card, it resolved, and then Oliver won.
Right, so think of the difference in the details of how these decks are built. One has interaction and one has air. So even if you get out ahead with these Leafkin Druids, with these Arboreal Gracers and so on, you're inevitably going to end up in a spot where you end up kind of down on relevant resources compared to your opponent. So even if they both have Nissas, Tomajko then has interaction to pick out the other cards that Syed has to play with.
So we'll go to the sideboard. And this is one of the reasons I did like Zan in the matchup, is I do feel like his sideboard has paid a lot of respect to this matchup.
Right, I completely agree. So we see Mystical Dispute and Aether Gust, both going to be great against the blue and green deck that Oliver is playing. And then Shifting Ceratops literally has the words, cannot be countered, and then also has protection from blue. So it's going to get past a lot of Tomajko's creatures.
Yeah, it gets past most of his deck. Hard thing is that Zan is in a hole 1-0, but there is a chance here for him.
Yeah, one of the nice things about kind of overcoming a game 1 deficit is the fact that you're boarding in 11 cards. This feels almost transformational.
They're going to get ready for game 2. If you haven't had a chance yet to head over to StarCityGames.com this month, make sure you check out our holiday sale. For the month of December, we have 15% off all online orders, and you can get that by going to our store and making sure you enter the promo code SCG15, 15 for 15%. It's the Star City holiday sale.
That's got to be one of our most just expansive sales this year.
I think it's one of the December one's usually one of the
everything.
I certainly save wish lists at our store for December.
Yeah.
And so now Oliver 1 game away from top 4, coming back on Sunday. We saw him win a real dogfight of a matchup with John Hobbs earlier today.
That was a great match, too.
Winning both his groups yesterday. Oliver, not, as you might expect of his style of play, playing good stuff decks in all 3 formats.
Yeah, any blue deck that allows him to maneuver his role within a game is something that you can expect Tomajko to bring to the table. He had a lot of success with Grixis Delver and Legacy. Delver strategies in general are something he's historically gravitated towards, even if he chose to go for his 4-color Mentor deck in Legacy this weekend.
On Zan Syed's side, a metagamer on his own. We've seen his team with the Devoted Devastation deck. Some mixed results this weekend, but overall I would say positive. You see Zan still in the tournament. Bertarioni piloting it. He is out. However,
the Devoted Devastation has just been a great meta call on this weekend.
Dylan Donegan playing that. He's still in the tournament.
Oh, absolutely, and he's very close to top 4 in the lower bracket.
He has two 2 wins away. Next match he's playing up against Matthew Dilks. He's going to be playing against Amulet Titan, a matchup he's probably pretty happy about.
Yeah, let me break down the matchup for you. I'll play a Simic Growth Chamber and die.
At that metagame choice, Zan, captain of Team Lotus Box. 5 top 8s and a win this year. Most of his best results on the tour, including all his wins, coming in Modern. See, it's Devoted Devastation, another good meta call in that format. That, I think, is the format that gives him the widest range to use metagaming.
That one, and Legacy in particular, he kind of just knocked it out of the park this weekend with a unique take on Sultai Snow, featuring a bunch of main deck copies of Abrupt Decay, Veil of Summer, Bitter Blossom.
Yeah, that is the one of the events where the Lotus Box team did split up as far as the decks they chose was in Legacy. But otherwise, we saw, Bant Ramp was their deck for Standard, and Devoted Devastation was the deck for Modern.
Right. And it feels a lot like the plan with this Bant Ramp deck is just to beat up on other mid-range decks, trying to go over the top of them.
Collins Mullen, actually still in the event as well. Those were the players on these decks. So right now, 3 of 4 still. We have 8, half the field is gone, and 3 of the 4 Lotus Box players still in.
Gotta feel good about those numbers.
And game 2, both players here keeping on 7s. This one we should expect Zan's deck to have a very different look to it. We'll see whether he can pilot it to 2 straight wins. Starting off just on a forest.
Yeah, and this is going to once again come down to who can leverage an early mana advantage into threats.
To Tomajko. Tomajko Temple and a go. So Zan again on the play, breaking out early with some mana ramp. It's to his Leafkin Druid. Every once in a while, the Simic Flash deck will fail to keep pace. It's an deck that only plays 6 ramp spells. It doesn't always have one on turn 2 with the same kind of consistency that Zan's deck does.
Exactly, and a lot of that just comes back to the fact that Tomajko really only wants to draw about 1 ramp spell per game. Anything more than that, and it's not going to be able to adequately answer the payoff cards the opponent presents.
Like the Zan, 2 Growth Spirals in hand, has the freedom here to just pass. Now, he doesn't have double blue, so he can only play 1. Says go, and now Oliver tries to fire off a Growth Spiral of his own.
And this is likely a question of if Zan wants to react with his own Growth Spiral, or keep the perceived shields up for some blue interaction.
Is going to be Growth Spiral. Yeah, I wasn't sure if he could cast the second one if he had a blue land in hand. It would have been possible. Looks like the land is Blast Zone. So Oliver continues the cantrips going. He spirals into an Opt. Draws Sinister Sabotage for the turn. I like this is going to shock, but no play. Just wants the mana. Says go. A lot of good cards in his hand. Good reactive cards. Sinister Sabotage, Aether Gust. He has at least 1 more land rolled up.
And the shock here over something like an island is just representing Frilled Mystic.
Yeah, I don't think, even if he doesn't have Frilled Mystic, the 2 life in this matchup, I don't particularly think matters. Maybe he has the card, maybe this is a bluff. I think he makes the play both ways.
True. For Syed, you might want to worry more about some chip damage like that, but if Tomajko loses the game, it's very rarely that he loses by inches.
Temple and pass for Zan. And now it gets interesting because since we have sideboarding, both players are now starting to play the tempo game plan. And that's where Oliver's tempo cards are going to start to shine. So we see a Petty Theft here on end step. He wants to just bounce the Leafkin Druid as a tempo play.
Right, and this just goes back to Tomajko being great at the tactical play in Magic and wanting to be able to maneuver with his cards rather than having to do things that are more on the rails.
we see Zan in response there. He charges his Blast Zone. He's been doing it incrementally. It went up to 2 that last turn and now to 3 on the bounce. But land drops and go. And it's starting to feel like a Simic Flash Mirror.
Right, and that's something that Syed is not particularly well equipped to play. There aren't any real flash threats that Syed has available.
Right. If it starts turning that matchup, what Syed, his best outcome is that he draws one of his Shifting Ceratops and opts out of this Flash Mirror.
Exactly.
Says, okay, well, this doesn't, you can't counter it or block it, so.
Right, the only thing that you can do to interact with the Shifting Ceratops with a blue card is you can Aether Gust it while it is still on the stack.
Right. See the Leafkin Druid, recast by Zan, and no land. Oliver rewarded here for his tempo play, puts Brazen Borrower into play.
Got to be excited about that. This is so frequently about mana advantages to an extent, and this is where Tomajko gets to start pulling ahead. On top of the fact that this Leafkin Druid is really just kind of keeping Syed at parity in terms of mana. You end up 1 ahead here, but Oliver is the one who's actually still catching up with lands. You're having to commit mana to make this effective land drop, and that's a really awkward spot to find yourself.
So, swing in here from Brazen Borrower, Zan to 17. Oliver gets the damage going. And ahead on the board, even on lands, this is feeling right for Oliver. Looks like we're going to see some main phase play. Is he just going to go for Nissa here? I think he is. If he has Mystical Dispute, he likely can win this counter war. It's Aether Gust from Zan. Dispute from Oliver. Zan needs Dispute back, and he has it. I'm wondering... Okay,
he must have just smelled blood in the water there.
Yeah, but it was not the case. So now Zan with actually an opportunity to resolve something. I believe he has a Nissa of his own.
And that can be a bit of a nightmare scenario for Tomajko if he can't pressure the Nissa back. It's possible his plan is to have this Nissa off the top and then Aether Gust Syed's Nissa or Brazen Borrower it after untapping a land.
Five mana from Zan. Using Leafkin Druid, this feels like it's going to be a Nissa, and it is. So Zan, this game, gets to be the one with the Planeswalker. Nissa going to... We have 3 mana here. Risen Reef. Gets Temple of Mystery. Zan holding off there on the Nissa Plus in case he found a breeding pool. That was some good sequencing.
Yeah, that would have been a huge pickup if he could find it. And as it stands, he's still doing a pretty good job of just maximizing the mana he has available.
Untaps the island with Nissa. And that's going to attack in for 3, so a big turnaround. Now, question on the way back. Oliver played Nissa into an open board. We know he's Nissa's on top of the deck, so he's going to get to Nissa back. Will that be good enough?
Really, Tomajko needs something to actually bounce Syed's Nissa and get it off of the battlefield. Because we know Syed has a copy of Hydroid Krasis in hand, and if Syed gets to untap with what's effectively a mana doubler and a Hydroid Krasis, that'll likely just be too much of an advantage for Tomajko to keep up with.
That makes sense. Tomajko shocking down to 13. You see, you're trying to tap, I would say, as few green sources possible. He's tapping a breeding pool here. So it feels like a bit of a mistap if it's Nissa he's going for. And that actually is going to be one. Yeah, I think there's a breeding pool hiding out there.
It's possible his plan is to untap a breeding pool and he doesn't want to tap lands on his turn.
That makes sense.
And then this makes sense.
Swings in, so offering a trade with Zan. I mean, if they're both at Nissa, Zan's going to likely trade this island for the breeding pool.
Right. And the other way that I could see this being the line from Tomajko is, one, if he wants to incentivize the exchange, because breeding pool is a better land than an island within Nissa.
Sure.
This is trying to convince Zan to put a land on the, basically take his counterspell shields down.
And that looks right. We then see Aether Gust on the Nissa. This is before any of the damage. So it looks like Oliver just did want to trade lands, which, when you look at this flash versus ramp, makes a ton of sense.
Absolutely. If both players are having to play a low to medium resource game, that's going to end up favoring Tomajko.
Unless Zan has Mystical Dispute here. Actually, even if he has Mystical Dispute, it doesn't matter. Oliver has 3 more mana.
Exactly.
This is just going to happen. And a really interesting exchange here to both first attack a Planeswalker, and then this is just an Oliver Tomajko play, right? To attack a Planeswalker, and then before damage, Aether Gust the Planeswalker you were attacking.
Yep. This is something where he was just trying to kind of zig in order to make the opponent zag.
A really nice attack there for Oliver, and at first it seems a little off, but then you look at the board that's happened as a result of it, and you can see why Oliver was a fan of this play.
Right, you can see how we arrived at this.
7 mana from Zan. It's just going to be Hydroid Graces. Yeah, Oliver has made a board where Zan can't really recast Anissa. He would lose it to Oliver's attackers, and now Oliver at the ready with Sinister Sabotage. Zan gets his cards, but Oliver is starting to pull ahead here. Now, should note, that was his last card.
Right. Tomajko's plan at this point is just to be ahead when Nissa ends up resolving.
Right.
And that's not a bad spot to be. If you have a Nissa that just has more loyalty and you're up a creature land, that's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, now there's still some ways this can go wrong for him, right? Zan is at a healthy life total. He has a Risen Reef. We could see some plays that are just like Leafkin Druids, Risen Reef triggers, and then a Finale of Devastation. If Oliver doesn't find interaction in time, that's going to KO him.
Correct.
That said, he's only something like a Frilled Mystic or 2 away from closing it out. Spec Oliver go a swing for 6, Zan to 10. That draw step Oliver just took, a very relevant card here.
Yeah, exactly. This is something where it's going to help Tomajko stay ahead.
We go to Zan. We know there's a Nissa here. There's also a Blast Zone on 3. If Zan needs to clean up that Brazen Borrower, he can. Because of this Risen Reef he has, he would like to not have it come to that.
Right. Risen Reef is generally going to be a more valuable permanent than a Brazen Borrower. The issue is when your life total starts to get low.
So 4 mana from Zan. Is this... It's turning into 5 maybe. This is just Nissa. Yeah, we see some of these forests stacked over to the left. It looks like it is Nissa who shakes the world. Zan trying to maximize his mana. What was that draw? Well, we don't know, but an immediate nod from Oliver. The Nissa resolved. He did not draw an answer. And that's cause for concern for Tomajko.
Yeah, this might be a spot where it's just something like a Brazen Borrower, maybe a bounce spell. A Mystical Dispute just really wouldn't do it here.
And Nissa's going to go to work. Plus is up to 6. This is going to untap an island. Makes it a 3/3. Zan would be just fine trading down the board here.
Oh, absolutely.
Here's a second Risen Reef.
And this is where things start to spiral in Zan's favor.
Right. Double Risen Reef means now he's drawing 2 cards per elemental. Whether they're lands or cards, it doesn't really matter. Pieces of cardboard. He's going to pull very far ahead. Mystical Dispute from Oliver. Now, Zan actually has the mana to pay here.
Ooh, but this will tap down that island and make it so Zan doesn't get a chance to pressure Tomajko's Nissa.
Right.
So this is Oliver just trying to turn the corner. He realizes he needs to end the game, and tapping down a 3/3 for this turn is a means to that end.
Yeah, whether or not Oliver likes that play, you look at Mystical Dispute as the card Oliver drew, and you think, I don't know what else this is going to do. There's a Nissa who shakes the world in play.
Exactly. Syed at this point has 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 mana on the battlefield.
Right. Back to Oliver goes. Zan is at 10. Maybe this is enough pressure that Zan will feel the need to chump block with a Risen Reef. I don't know that he wants to go to 1. If Zan figures he has to use the Blast Zone to clean up the Brazen Borrower anyway, it does not cost him a lot to chump with a Risen Reef. We'll see his choice. A swing for 9 from Tomajko. This would put Zan down to 1 if he takes it.
At this point, you have to imagine that at least one Risen Reef is getting in front of a land here.
Right. Even if Zan's hand is Hydroid Krasis, I still think that's the case. And Zan's actually thinking about chump blocking with both, but looks like he decides 1. So he'll drop to 4.
Right, and the idea here is if you're going to get another turn anyway, this Risen Reef is going to only be worth 3 life.
Right.
Right, if it's dying after the block. So this way, you at least get the opportunity to get another card out of it.
Zan's hand, one of his pickups was a second Nissa. That is not a lot of help here. And here we go, Zan. It's another Risen Reef. So, 2 cards. Draws the first. That is Breeding Pool. And the second. That goes to hand. Is there a card in Zan's spot that you're looking for here?
I think for the most part, you're just trying to survive. You know you have the long game, so you just need to make the game go long. Hydroid Krasis is likely your best pickup.
Yeah, Krasis seems good. Even Aether Gust, pretty good here.
Aether Gust would be incredible. Cavalier of Thorns, incredibly
Has
respectable.
reach. Yeah, I actually think Cavalier sounds great.
Mm-hmm. It's even an elemental, so it plays with Risen Reef.
And on Zan's side, this is 3, 4, 5. I think that's that looks like Cavalier mana.
Oh, it's 6 because you get to activate the Garen Brig.
There we go. Okay, 6, 7, 8.
About to see one of those big jellyfish.
It is looking that way. So Garen Brig makes 6 mana. Leafkin Druid plus Forest plus Garen Brig is 6. Then the 2 lands makes 8. Then Nissa going to untap that. So we have 8 floating at the moment. Krasis for 4. That is the play. Or Krasis for 6. For 3, X equals 6, right? 8 mana.
I think it's for... Right.
Yeah.
It is for 6, drawing 3 and gaining 3.
Right.
Correct.
So Zan up to 7. Draws Mystical Dispute, Krasis, and land.
And this is the spot very similar to the standards we saw with Sphinx's Revelation, where the first Revelation was never the one that got it.
No.
But when you start chaining them is when the game just ends up so far out of reach.
2 more mana from Zan. Cast Leafkin Druid. This triggers both Risen Reefs. Yeah, and Oliver cannot keep pace with this. So Temple into play. Scry off Temple. Does Zan want that card? He does not. So the second Risen Reef trigger draws.
No, this is a game that feels like it's really gotten away from Tomajko, and I don't know how he's going to get back into this one. It feels like he's got 1, maybe 2 more draw steps.
And he picks up the cards. Was very close to finishing off Zan Syed, but he was not able to do it. And with that, Zan forces a deciding Game 3.
And this is going to also be the first game of the match that Tomajko was in the play. And that's going to be a dramatic advantage for this Flash deck. It's so much better when it's playing from ahead rather than having to play catch-up.
So I want to go back to the turn. This felt like Game 2 was going to Oliver. But there was one turn where Oliver tapped out for his own. It seemed like out of nowhere he just said main phase Nissa, which isn't normally what you see out of the Flash deck. Then a counter war happened. Oliver lost the counter war, and from there he felt very far behind.
Well, think of it this way. Tomajko only had 2 counter spells there. And I know that sounds like a lot, but there's a point where that's just never going to be enough if you think you're having to go 100 turns.
Sure.
Right. You can only answer so many of Syed's payoff cards, and you need to actually get to the point where you're pressuring your opponent. So, if he doesn't have any way to actually attack Syed, then that was him just kind of saying, all right, this works or it doesn't, but I know one way or another, if you have that many reactive cards, then you don't have that many threats, and that's probably okay.
Yeah, just going to show this window where Oliver is still a tempo deck. He can't actually play pure control. So he might have the board, but after a few turns of it, he does need to start making threats.
Exactly. You can do that for a couple of turns, but if you aren't applying pressure, you're going to end up seeing a game like that last one.
For Oliver Tomajko from New York, 29-year-old, played 20 opens on the tour this year with 5 top 8s. Similar stats actually to Syed this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of them with incredibly impressive years.
With the win of this next game, one of these players will come back tomorrow. Tomorrow, top 4 semifinals and finals, each one is a full match of Standard, Legacy, and Modern between the players. Best 2 out of 3 matches of all the decks they brought to the tournament.
Best of 3 of 3.
Best of 3, best of 3s.
What's the most awkward thing we can call it?
The best of 3 squared.
Best of 3-3.
Here for the third game. This one mentioned that Oliver will be on the play. We have not had that yet. He's been at a mana disadvantage most of these games. He did dodge Shifting Ceratops last game.
Right, and there is a point where that card is going to run away with some games by itself, but if Tomajko isn't applying pressure and the game ends up going long, Syed can just win without it, like we saw that last game.
For Team Lotus Box mentioned there are 3 players in the field. They would love to get 3 players into the top 4, but this could be their first slot. For Tomajko, Team Mythicos Studios. Has not had a losing record in any formats yet.
No. No. Both of these players doing quite well to make this deep a run in the event. Both fresh off of their bye today. Well, not that fresh. I guess they both had to win a match, but regardless.
And Oliver on a 7, Zan on a 6.
The bright side is when you are playing Risen Reef, it's not that difficult to end up just recouping that loss pretty quickly.
Right, if you get an uncontested Risen Reef, you typically end up with more cards than you can cast.
Exactly. That last game we saw Syed with sort of an embarrassment of riches, right? Tomajko conceded while Syed still had 4 cards in hand. The nice thing is when you have things like Cavalier, like Risen Reef, it's very rare that the problem is dying without anything to do.
This is our first of 2 win and ins for day 2, or day 3 for Sunday. We have Syed versus Oliver Tomajko after the conclusion of this match. We do have our second one between Colin Roundtree and Edgar Magayesh.
Really, just all of these players on top of their game this weekend.
Zan keeping on 6. So here we go for our deciding game. Oliver starts the tempo, likes what he sees. There we go on Zan's side. Looks like Leafkin Druid at the ready for turn 2. But Oliver, this is the first time in the play where he gets to set up a mana advantage of his own, and you see a main phase growth spiral to that end.
Ooh. Shifting Ceratops off the top for Syed.
I like this a lot, especially when Zan's on the draw and on a mulligan. It's hard to play a fair fight, and one thing that is not playing fair is if Zan just makes Shifting Ceratops this turn. Now, Nightpack Ambusher from Oliver complicates things because that card is not blue.
This is a big play. What this is doing is Tomajko creating a situation where even if Shifting Ceratops comes down, he's ready for it. This makes Syed either go ahead and just do something that's not nearly as impactful as he would like for it to be against this blue deck, or go ahead and Aether Gust at sorcery speed. And this is a different way to sort of set up that 1-2 Nightpack Ambusher into Nissa squeeze that we've seen all weekend.
Well, I like what Oliver's play here is he made the game about something different. Normally, this matchup is about Oliver holding up mana and countering plays, but because he was on the play with a growth spiral, he decided to just change and make this about mid-ranging and cast his Nightpack Ambusher.
Correct.
Now now that it's in play, he certainly can go back to that other game plan, pass the turn, get a wolf. And Zan says, yes, that happens.
And if Syed doesn't have anything like an Aether Gust, just 2 wolves will be bigger than a Shifting Ceratops.
Oliver says go. So trigger is on.
Oh, this might be in Tomajko's second main phase.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to determine where we are here. I know Oliver wanted to move to end step. Zan may have stopped him before that. But he does go for the Aether Gust. Oliver. Frilled Mystic says no. This means no wolf this turn. Zan got Oliver to cast a spell.
This is a window for Nissa. Does he have it?
Land. Yeah, it doesn't even need the land. A Nissa here on Zan's side is the play. It's the big prize. We don't know if he had it to start. He had Shifting Ceratops. That doesn't seem good enough.
No, that is not even close to good enough on this battlefield.
Shocks a land into play. That feels like a Nissa.
I would be surprised if it wasn't.
Because he can make Nissa and Ceratops here,
right?
But only if he shocks. I think that's the play. Zan with the near perfect here. That's going to be a big turnaround. Nissa who shakes the world from Zan.
Oh my gosh.
Now, if he makes Ceratops, this is just very good. So starts out now by untapping a land. Has to be a forest, which he will do. That's
He's got a few of those. I think he'll find a way to manage.
And then 2 cards left. We know one is Ceratops, and this is the maximum punish for Oliver.
Ooh.
So the sideboard card from Zan. And this was the biggest turnaround. Oliver taps out. What is the worst that could happen? Well, this is just about it.
Oh, yeah, this is the absolute nightmare scenario for Tomajko. And this is the problem with kind of pivoting into this Haymaker versus Haymaker strategy against a ramp deck.
Right. You can do it contextually, but in general, Tomajko's deck is worse at this kind of game plan, and Zan's showing him why.
Exactly. You know, look at Shifting Ceratops here. If you attack in with Nightpack Ambusher and Frilled Mystic at Nissa, 1, you're probably not going to get to kill the Nissa, and 2, Shifting Ceratops just gets to eat a free Frilled Mystic.
Right. On Oliver's side, what his deck wants to do is to say go here and get a wolf with Nightpack Ambusher. But now with the board looking like what it is, I don't know that that's a winning line for Oliver.
No, I just don't think that's realistic because on the other side, Syed's also getting a 3/3 every turn and effectively doubling his mana.
Oliver, though, going to stick to the game plan. Gets a wolf.
So if he has something like a Brazen Borrower or an Aether Gust here, that's how this is a winning line.
And his Borrower to get rid of Nissa. This interaction always, at the first time you see it, you said, wait, I thought you didn't cast a spell. But it does work. So Oliver trying to keep the board clear. He leaves up specifically enough mana for Sinister Sabotage. That might be the card. There might be a counterspell in hand. This all might be a bluff, and maybe the only thing he has is an end-step Brazen Borrower.
Exactly. You could even see something like Mystical Dispute being hard cast here as a possibility.
Right, Zan sitting on 6 mana. Actually, no, 4 creatures. Let's make that 8 mana.
All right, so just kidding on that Mystical Dispute.
Right. Well, to be fair, there's enough creatures on Oliver's side that he might be able to attack down Nissa.
Sure.
But we'll see on Zan's side. He does want to spend a blue here. I was going to say he has 3 forests, so if he wants to recast Nissa, he could use Castle Garenbrig here. But it's going to be Nissa who shakes the world. Sinister Sabotage from Oliver. Does Zan have a way to counter back? He does not.
Oh my
and
God.
Oliver gets the counterspell here. It was the card he needed. It's the only counterspell that would have worked.
Right, and this is a spot now. Syed can't cast another really important Haymaker this turn, and Tomajko, I'd say Tomajko's ahead on the table.
Yeah, and Zan just says go. So to Oliver we go. Now if Zan has a second Nissa, he can try again next turn, and it might be good enough.
Right, but this also tells Tomajko that if he has something like a Nissa, another Night Pack Ambusher, etc., he knows the shields are
Right.
down. That Nissa would have resolved if Syed had anything.
Right, is there... Yeah, I mean, I guess if Syed's counterspell is Aether Gust,
Sure.
he's still live for that, because you can't win a counterspell war with it.
Sure.
But certainly no Mystical Dispute, no counterspells of Zan's outside of that. Oliver takes a Reed of Shifting Ceratops. Not much the deck can do to it other than overpower it. And Oliver says go. Reaches for that wolf token. Zan says end step Growth Spiral. Is that fine? That'll work. Zan draws. No land into play. Another wolf for Oliver. More mana for Oliver. Things are starting to go his way again. He's recovered from that one turn fairly nicely.
Right, he just really needs to keep some sort of snowbally payoff card off the battlefield.
Zan, it looks like he's just going to go for Nissa again, except we see 7 mana. Make that 8. This might just be a Krasis. And it is Hydroid Krasis for 6. And it's a Mystical Dispute. Oliver says you can have the cards, but you cannot have the 6/6.
Right, and this is Tomajko effectively saying he wants to keep Syed off the battlefield.
And now we see another Night Pack Ambusher from Tomajko, and this looks like he's turning the corner and going to try to go for lethal to lock up his spot in Sunday competition.
Right, and he's doing all of this with the Krasis trigger on the stack, so he knows it will resolve.
I start to look at this board here. I'm not sure that Zan can survive the attack.
I think we're going to see our first semifinalist.
It is looking that way. Oliver keeping pace, lets the game slip, and then takes it right back. Gets ahead on this tempo plan, and yeah, you see he's counting it out. So the knight there, those are 5s, those are 4s. This is a 3. So if he blocks the 2 5s, he's taking 10, make that 11. If Oliver bounces a blocker, then it's 16. So not quite enough, but it's a 2-turn clock for sure. And
Split the
Oliver
difference.
says, yeah, we'll trade some creatures. That's fine. Let's make this happen.
Right, at this point, Tomajko's just saying this is going to be enough damage over the course of the next 2 attack steps that Syed is done.
And there's that Brazen Borrower hiding out on an adventure for Oliver too. In case he ends up a little short, he can add another attacker. This will be a huge chunk of Zan's life total. The 3/3. Looks like it's going to trade with the only thing it can trade with. That's Frilled Mystic. Which means the pro-blue creature. And yeah, this is actually the right block.
Yeah, I think you have to put it on one of the wolves. You save 1 extra life that way, and assuming this Ceratops trades with an ambusher, the wolf will shrink to a 3/3.
Right, so you get a pair of trades, but this is still going to be 12 damage. Zan will drop to 5.
Right. When you're ahead on the battlefield, reducing resources like this is just going to favor the person who is ahead.
trades happen. Zan does drop to 5. And Oliver's side doesn't have to do anything else. He can say go and collect another wolf. And that's going to be the play. We are to Zan's last turn, trying to stay alive, and I just don't know that it's there. Going to make a go at it here with Growth Spiral. Just some more mana from Oliver. Casts the Brazen Borrower. This is all after he gets the wolf.
Yep, and, shields are down. He's saying, all right, impress me.
So many creatures in play from Oliver, and Zan, with so few resources, just doesn't seem to be able to do it anymore. 5 cards in hand, but 6 cards in hand, but certainly no way to cast them all.
Right, Zan has to both deal with Nightpack Ambusher and block 2 things. And that's to go to 1.
That's to go to 1.
That's not
right.
even to win the game.
And Zan's counting it out. There's just...
He goes, all right, what is the...
Yeah, I don't know
this
there's
into
even...
this into this. If the top of my deck is perfect, what does that look like?
He's looking for the hero play, but there's just so many things. There's 5 attackers already here. Let's see if he can find something. Here's Leafkin Druid.
All right.
And a pass. 3 mana up. On Oliver's side, this seems pretty straightforward. I think you can... they're all 0 power creatures. You can turn everything sideways.
Beat downs. Is this it?
1, 2, 3. That's still lethal.
It's even Aether Gust.
He's holding on. Maybe he can survive a turn. And Oliver puts another one in play. So Oliver Tomajko does pick up the win. 2 games